Thermoregulation of the Galapagos fur seal, Homeostasis Internal by Elena Buckley. Homeostasis is the process of maintaining a stable internal body environment, even when the external environmental conditions are changed. It does this by a system of feedback known as a feedback loop, which stabilizes health and functioning. An example of a homeostatic control system is thermoregulation. In simple terms, thermoregulation is a process which acts to ensure an organism can keep its body temperature within certain parameters, even when the external temperature changes. Thermoregulation controls the balance of heat production and heat loss in the body to maintain the organism's internal body temperature. If the organism's internal temperature becomes too high, mechanisms are activated for heat loss, and if the organism's internal body temperature becomes too low, mechanisms are activated to conserve and retain heat. Thermoregulation is vital for the success and survival of an organism and their species. Without thermoregulation, the organism wouldn't be able to survive in its habitat, because if an organism fails to thermoregulate, then the internal body temperature of that organism would be affected. If the internal body temperature gets too high, and the organism is unable to cool the body down using thermoregulation, it causes hyperthermia, which results in the enzymes being denatured. Enzymes only work at an optimum temperature. When the increasing internal temperature eventually exceeds its optimum temperature, the enzymes would begin to be denatured. Hydrogen bonds are broken, causing the enzyme to change shape, meaning it can no longer fit into the substrate to complete the reaction. The death of these cells would further result in the death of the fur seal, as it would no longer be able to carry out essential processes for normal bodily functions, such as movement, respiration, enzyme production, and other various metabolic activities. Here is an example of an enzyme being denatured. If the internal body temperature gets too low and the organism is unable to warm the body up using thermoregulation, it will result in hypothermia. Enzymes will move slowly, as there is less kinetic energy, meaning less successful collisions between the substrate and active site occur. When the temperature becomes very low, the enzymes will become inactive, meaning no successful collisions will occur. Both hyperthermia and hypothermia will lead to death of the cells and eventually the death of the organism. A feedback loop is a series of events involving a stimulator, detector, processor, effector, and response. There are two types of feedback, negative and positive. Negative feedback systems form a looped feedback system that restores the condition to the original state. Positive feedback systems are the exact opposite of negative feedback system. It forms a looped feedback system that changes the body from its original position. Positive feedback can be described as a self-amplifying cycle in which one change leads to an even more significant changes in the same direction because the rate of a process increases as the concentration of the product increases. The mammal I will be discussing today is the Galapagos fur seal. The Galapagos fur seals are members of the Otaridae family of pinnipeds and are only found on the Galapagos Islands, a group of islands 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador. In this environment, the fur seals are exposed to intense solar radiation and high air temperatures. Spending 70% of their time on land, they are the most terrestrial of all fur seals. These seals feed at night on a variety of fish and small squid. They feed at night in the cooler temperatures so they can conserve their energy during the hot days. Their temperature is maintained by using negative feedback. The Galapagos fur seals use internal corrective mechanisms and behavioral responses to maintain their internal body temperature. The Galapagos fur seals are endothermic, as they maintain a body temperature of 37.7 degrees Celsius. Endotherms are warm-blooded animals that generate their own heat from their metabolism through ATP production, meaning they can maintain a constant body temperature independent of the environment. This is an advantage, as their internal body temperature will always be the same, despite the environmental conditions. However, the disadvantage of this is that they need a constant energy supply. How do the Galapagos fur seals thermoregulate? These pointy-nosed seals have a body covered in two layers of fur. The first layer is short and fine, which forms a very warm layer closest to the fur seal's body. The second layer is much longer in length, which forms an outer waterproof layer known as guard hair. This insulation helps minimize heat loss. Given these thick coats and the hot environment, the Galapagos fur seals have to work very hard to cool themselves down. Thermoregulation is controlled internally by the cardiovascular system. When the internal body temperature becomes too hot, blood is directed towards the flippers by a process known as vasodilation, where the capillaries under the surface of your skin dilate or open to increase blood flow, in this case to the skin surface of the flipper. This lets your body release heat through radiation. The flippers are hairless and contain many blood vessels. This means they are well suited for heat exchange. If the fur seal is in the sea, it will hold a flipper out of the water into the wind. As the wind passes over the surface of the flipper, water from its wet surface will evaporate, cooling the flipper and the blood flowing through it. This helps lower the organism's internal body temperature. This is the most effective process of heat loss for the Galapagos fur seal. This process of heat loss is known as convection, which is the transfer of heat from one place to another by the movement of fluids. Other behavioural thermoregulation that occurs to decrease the internal body temperature when the seal's internal body temperature gets too high includes the seals utilising their environment by cooling themselves down in tide pools, entering the sea, seeking shade from boulders, caves or shrubs, and lying against rocks rather than sandy areas. On these rocky shores of the Galapagos Islands, the fur seals prefer 6 to 10 Galapagos fur seals may occupy an area of about 100 square metres. Grouping together in this manner is believed to be largely due to the rarity of suitable rocky sites. However, because of this, it has the benefit of making the females less vulnerable to predation or harassment. This method of heat loss by lying against cold rocks is known as conduction. Conduction is a transfer of heat energy from one molecule to another through a substance. They may also sweat depending on their level of hydration. This heat loss process happens by evaporation. Sweat cools your skin as it evaporates, therefore cooling the blood flowing through it. Evaporation works with convection to disperse energy through liquids. The Galapagos fur seals also have a smaller body size. They are the smallest of all pinnipeds. This small body size helps them release heat. Components of the thermoregulation system. The hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a small but vitally important section of the brain, containing a large number of small nuclei. Its main function is homeostasis. The hypothalamus integrates the body's two communication systems, the nervous and endocrine systems. One of its many functions is to detect the temperature. It does this by two types of receptors. Thermosensitive neural tissue contains specialized receptors in the skin, which responds to the external temperature by measuring the temperature of the skin. And the central receptors respond to the temperature of the blood, the internal body temperature. If the temperature exceeds its upper limit, signals are sent to the specific effectors to thermoregulate. The vasomotor center. The vasomotor center is a group of sympathetic nerve cells contained within the medulla oblongata, a structure of the brainstem, which are regulated involuntarily without conscious effort by the autonomic nervous system. When neurons in the vasomotor center are activated, the vasomotor then coordinates its response by modulating the autonomic nervous system. The vasomotor center is responsible for controlling vasodilation. Vasodilation is a widening of blood vessels from the relaxation of smooth muscle cells within the vessel walls. This is a mechanism seals use to increase blood flow to the flippers for heat exchange. The Galapagos fur seal negative feedback loop. The psychological system that controls thermoregulation operates as an automatic control system that responds to negative feedback. The stimulator is an increase in temperature above the optimum temperature. A detector is the hypothalamus, which registers this increase in temperature. The processor is the vasomotor center. Neurons in the vasomotor center are activated, and the vasomotor center then coordinates its response by modulating the autonomic nervous system. The effector. Vasodilation occurs. blood is sent to the flippers for heat exchange, and the response results in the fur seal transferring heat from its body to the environment to decrease the body's internal temperature back to 37.7 degrees Celsius. What is the adaptive advantage of thermoregulation in the Galapagos fur seals? Being able to thermoregulate is an adaptive advantage of the Galapagos fur seal because it enables it to conserve energy and live in its habitat, the Galapagos Islands, on land in the hot temperatures where it breeds and rests. The breeding season of the Galapagos fur seal lasts from mid-August to mid-November in the cooler temperatures, because the cooler temperatures mean less heat stress and a greater availability of prey. This preference to breed in cooler temperatures shows the importance of the fur seal needing to remain cool by thermoregulation. And because they are the only fur seals to breed in tropical waters, they must have efficient mechanisms to reduce heat stress, such as thermoregulation. The adaptive advantage is energy efficient, as it reduces the need to use energy for behavioral thermoregulation, therefore helping to conserve energy for important processes, such as finding food, breeding, and important bodily functions such as cell division or enzyme production. If the Galapagos fur seal didn't have the adaptation to thermoregulate by controlling its cardiovascular system, it wouldn't be able to survive in its habitat because it would become too hot and die. This is because the internal body temperature of the fur seal would become too high, as it cannot effectively regulate its temperature by thermoregulation. As this is the most effective method for losing heat, the seal would struggle to maintain a suitable temperature by the use of only energy-expensive behavioral mechanisms. This high temperature would soon lead to hypothermia and then death. Therefore, the adaptive advantage of thermoregulation in Galapagos fur seals is vital for the success of the species, as it enables it to successfully find food, continue to reproduce, and conserve energy for vital bodily functions, ensuring the survival of the species. Disruption to the thermoregulatory system. Fever. A potential disruption to the thermoregulatory system is fever. A fever is often a result of an infection, which may be caused by wounds from fighting, or it can be a result of many other diseases. There is an increasing risk of fever to the fur seals today, because the spread of feral dogs on the Galapagos Islands, whom may injure the fur seals, with the wound resulting in infections causing fever. This may jeopardize the future of some fur seal colonies. Chemicals called pyrogens are released in the bloodstream via white blood cells and flow to the hypothalamus, where they bind to receptors which result in an increase in thermoregulatory set point, usually by 2 to 3 degrees. This helps the organisms kill bacteria and inhibits viruses, as it accelerates the metabolism and all other defense mechanisms. As a result of the thermoregulatory set point rising, the organism will begin to feel cold, so to retain heat, vasoconstriction occurs. This can be potentially denature enzymes, and if the internal body temperature gets too high, it may lead to death of the cells and further the death of the organism. Positive feedback loop for fever. The stimulator is the fever. The detector is pyrogens in the blood that bind to receptors in the hypothalamus, causing the set point to rise. The processor are neurons in the vasomotor center that are activated. The vasomotor center then coordinates its response by modulating the autonomic nervous system. The effector is vasoconstriction, which is constriction of the blood vessels, an attempt to retain heat by limiting heat loss from the body's core to skin. The response is the internal body temperature, which rises above 37.7 degrees Celsius.